Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 140 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week we're revisiting my lovely Amiga 3000, which I've done several episodes on before. Now the last one, I believe, was where I took my Amiga 3000 and I put my A3640, which is the 40 megahertz, or I'm sorry, which is the 25 megahertz 68040 card that's normally in the Amiga 4000. Put that in here, and it was pretty darn hot. It ran really hot. So what I did is I took a 40 megahertz 68040 and I put it in the board and underclocked it at 25 megahertz. So you got a fast chip running slower, cooled it right down, and the computer ran cool as a cucumber, and I've used it quite a bit. No problems at all. You'll see my video for it right there. But we're doing something else to it this week. We're going to upgrade this little guy up to a 68060 with a new BFG 9060 board that you see right there. This is a sweet, sweet little board that we're going to talk about and put in the Amiga 3000 right now. In case you weren't aware, the BFG 9060 is a 68060 accelerator designed for the Amiga 3000 and the Amiga 4000 machine. It's designed for the 100-pin, I think it's a 100-pin CPU slot that both of them have, which is kind of nice because there are not really all that many modern accelerators for that card. Here, I've got a 68060. This is the LC version in here. This is the one without the floating point unit. We're going to address that issue at some point in the future, but it's a full 50 megahertz. Now this will be set to 50 megahertz by default because I do not want to overheat it inside the Amiga 3000 case. If I had it in my Amiga 4000, which has a little more room for fans, I could, in theory, overclock this to 75 megahertz or even 100 megahertz, which would probably start the thing on fire. The card itself is an open source project. You can find it on GitHub and order the parts and make one for yourself. It was designed by Matthias Heinrichs, which I'll have a link for in the description, free for non-commercial reproduction. So if you want to produce this and sell these cards for a profit, I believe you need to get special permission for that. She's got 128 megabytes of fast RAM on here, a couple of little Xilinx chips on here that control everything. I assume this little guy right here is probably some kind of voltage regulator. Over here we have a fan header, which is going to come in real handy because I am going to want to put a little tiny fan on here. And there's also some programming headers, so you can actually program this itself, update the firmware and such. One of the things it allows you to do when you reprogram the card is use a 68040 chip instead of a 68060. But you have to specifically set the card up for a 68040. There's special firmware and special settings you have to make in order to do it. It's not just a basic chip replacement. And like a couple of the other more modern Amiga items, they've had some fun with the silk screening on here. Only Amiga makes it possible. Highway to hell, address everything. So he's had some fun on this board. So where'd I get this handsome little guy from? From my friend Kavanaugh's, who I mentioned a few weeks ago, also supplied me with a 256 megabyte Zorro 3 card that I reviewed right there. Now, I really, really, really appreciate it. This was a kind gift from him because he wanted to support the channel. He does not sell these cards at this point in time because he's overwhelmed with orders from when my friend Chris Edwards did a review on these. Maybe he'll start selling them in the future, but at this point in time, they can be ordered from several sources, including Retro Passion. I believe he has some in stock. And it's possible that AmigaStore.eu will start selling them maybe late December or early January. But in talking to my friends there, they say a lot of that depends on whether or not they're able to get the actual chips. So we'll see. But if they start making it, they've always got great prices. Now, the way I want to do this review today is I would like to compare it directly with the 68040 that I have in my current Amiga 3000. Absolutely love it. This little guy right now has 32 megabytes of fast RAM, 16 megabytes on the motherboard, and another 16 megabytes on my Fastlane Z3 card. Now, I have to use the Fastlane Z3 because one of the caveats with a lot of Amiga 3000s is once you put an accelerator in here, it really messes up the onboard SCSI, which is a real shame because the onboard SCSI is actually pretty good. But when I put my A3640 in this machine, onboard SCSI goes wonky and corrupts every drive I put on it within hours. The same thing is said to probably happen with the new BFG 9060 also. There have been reports that you cannot use the onboard SCSI in the Amiga 3000 in a lot of cases. Honestly, your mileage may vary. For example, my 16 megahertz Amiga 3000, my original one I bought back in the early 90s, I can put accelerators in that all day long and the onboard SCSI works fine. And it's an old, like a first or second generation Amiga 3000. My more modern Amiga 3000, which was a 25 megahertz version, which is now a ReAmiga, one of John Hertel's ReAmiga boards. You'll see a link to my adventures with that there, and it works perfect now. No, I put an accelerator in there. Onboard SCSI just goes freaky. It just doesn't work. Yes, I've changed the SCSI chip. I put a more modern SCSI chip in there. I've switched over to the AMD SCSI chip. It doesn't care. So I assume I'll have to still use my Fastlane Z3 in here. But for now, let's take a look at some benchmarks and see how this little guy performs at 68040 speeds, and then we're going to compare that in the same way to the 68060. What we're going to do here is a series of real-world tests on the Amiga 3000 using the A3640 running at 25 megahertz. Let's start out with a good old sysinfo, the program that we all say doesn't work well, but we use anyways and actually works incredibly well. Let's do a speed test on this little guy right here. 35 times faster than an A600, 1.02 times an Amiga 4000 running at 25 megahertz. That's pretty realistic right there, because it's going to be just about exactly the same as an Amiga 4000 performance-wise. Let's take a look at the drive speed on here. Here, we're not going to get the full 10 megabits per second that theoretically my Fastlane Z3 can handle, and we don't get that because I'm using a SCSI to SD, a Rev 5.1, which theoretically isn't ever going to get much faster than 3 to 4 megabytes per second. I'd have to have a version 6 in here to reach those speeds. So let's look at AIBB. This is a special version of AIBB that's designed to work on a 68060 because the standard version crashes. Here we're going to use test code with 040 math on the machines that can handle it, test code with 020, and then 6882 math. 68882 math. Let's run a few little tests here, see how fast we are in 68040 land. Oh, not too bad. 16.08 coup rate. See, it's right on par with an 040 in a lot of Amiga 4000 in a lot of ways. Right pixel is going to be generating some pixels on the screen, and we'll be comparing this directly with the 060 performance in a bit. Now, the 060 will not have an FPU, so the FPU-based tests will not work on here. Let's check memtest speed. That's a little low, 4.23 megabytes per second. I'm wondering if it's because it's using maybe the Zorro 3 memory on the Fastlane card, which is going to be a little bit sluggish, and not the onboard memory. Yeah, that'll be an interesting test. Now here's the famous beach ball test. This is using 68040 and then the math coprocessor. Mighty quick, about the speed as an Amiga 4000. That's going to be dramatically lower, I suspect, on the 060 because there is no FPU. Now, benchmarks are great. but real-world performance is very important. So let's say we launch Art Department Professional here. See how long it takes to launch, just a few seconds. Let's load in a nice file. Let's load in one of my sunset pictures here. We're going to bring that up. And we want to see how long it takes to load it in, and also how long it takes to crop and render. This is a 1280 by 720 IFF file. We're going to scale it to 362 by 482 in ham6 mode. So 362, 482, and we're going to see how long that takes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 11 seconds. Now that we've got Floyd dithering in here, we're going to render this little thing and see how she looks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So about 7.5 seconds to bring this the image up. So 11 seconds to scale it, 7 seconds to render it, and this is going to use the 040 library with the math coprocessor, so I'm curious if it's even going to work with the new chip. And we want to test things like how long it takes to open Windows. This is working in an 8-color Workbench. Let's bump it up to a 16-color Workbench here. Kind of push the Amiga 3000 a bit. And we're going to reopen these and see how long they take. Everything's going to slow down when you're in 16-color mode, even on an Amiga 3000 with an 040. But you can see about how long it takes to open up the folders. This downloads folder has a lot of stuff in it, so it takes a few seconds to open. There it is. And we can see scrolling speeds. We want to compare this to how this works when we get up to the 68060. Let's put her in and see where we're at. So here's the inside of our lovely Amiga 3000. You can see I've got my A3640 card in here with a very low profile heatsink. This, because it's a 40 megahertz chip running at 25 megahertz, generates very little heat, and I haven't had any heat issues at all with this card. I like that idea. This is critical, what I'm about to tell you next. When you use an A3640 card or some other Amiga 3000 accelerators, you have to change jumpers 100, 102, 103, and 104 to use the clock that's on the accelerator. For example, this little guy right here is a 25 megahertz clock. It uses the clock on the accelerator for timing. When you use a BFG 9060, it uses the clocks on the motherboard. That is critical. These have to be moved back to their original positions using the internal clock of the board, not the external clock here. I'm going to put that in the documentation, but don't forget it. I'm going to go ahead and swap those jumpers right now that I need to swap. So I've changed the jumpers. Here, this is J100. This has to be set to 1.2 instead of 3.4 that I had it before. This is J102. It had to stay on 3.4, which is where it was, and then 103 had to move over back to 1.2, which was using the internal clock. The FPU right here has to be switched back to 1.2. Now, what would really be cool, but ain't gonna happen, is if we could use the 68060 LC chip in here, and it would still use the 68882 FPU. That would be nifty, but that ain't gonna happen, I don't think. Now, in theory, all we should have to do is slot this little beauty in right here into the CPU slot. Nice tight fit. Sits nicely. It's a much smaller card than the A60 or 3640. Now, let me go show you what I'm thinking about doing for cooling on this little guy. So take a look at this cute little fan here that I found. Now, these are pretty small. They're 5-volt fans, but what they do is they blow the air out the side instead of the top. So what I use these for is for low profile situations. I just mount them on a processor, not one that gets terribly hot that needs a heat sink, but on something like this that can get by without a heat sink at 50 megahertz. And it should, in theory, take the heat from the CPU and blow it that way out the back of the case towards the power supply instead of up roasting my floppy drive, which is right above it. And right here we have a 5-volt fan that in theory should work just fine if I mount this correctly and get its power from 5 volts right there. So I'm going to get some of my double-sided thermal tape, my special tape, and I put just a little bit around the edges to hold her in place, and we'll see if she works. So we've got the CPU fan on here. I couldn't find my double-sided tape, so I used a couple globs of the heat sink compound, and I'll clean that off once I find my double-sided tape and remount it, but it keeps it in place for now. There's a jumper here. This is JP1. This controls the clock frequency. If both are set in M1, which is what it's defaulting to right here, it's going to use a 50 megahertz clock speed for an 060 or 25 megahertz if you have it set up for an 040. You can also set this for like 12.5 megahertz, which slows it way down. You can set it for 75 megahertz, or you can set it to 100 megahertz and overclock this little guy. Don't go past 75 unless you are really, really, really confident that your 68060 can handle that kind of speed. If you're not sure, stick with 75 megahertz or 50 megahertz. Don't take a chance on burning out your CPU. That would be no fun. Well, I'll be hornswoggled here, officially hornswoggled. I put the 68060 board in, and I used my Fastlane Z3, which you see right back there, to try and boot with it as I required with the A3640. I got nothing. It would power, it would give me no display, and eventually the SCSI light would just come on and stay on. So I thought, you know what? I'll take the board out and I'll throw it on the onboard SCSI on the board, and the thing boots absolutely perfectly, absolutely wonderfully. I'm really, really surprised. I'm not running into any of the corruption issues I ran in with the A3640 running with the onboard SCSI, although who knows, it may turn up. So let's go ahead and test this without the Fastlane Z3 board and see where we're at. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to run our tests again. Now the first thing I noticed was how unbelievably fast this thing booted. It booted in just a fraction of a second. It was beautiful. Let's take a look at some of our tools here. We're going to look at show config, and it tells us 68060, no FPU, but with an MMU, which is exactly what we want. 128 megabytes of memory right on the board, 16 megabytes on the motherboard itself, and 2 megabytes of fast RAM. We're missing our 16 megabytes from the Fastlane, but that's okay. Now, she seems very speedy, but let's go ahead and test some of our utilities. We're going to go ahead and go into our sysinfo. It's going to give us a warning because it detects a 68060. That's fine. Again, 68060, no FPU. Run our speed test, and we're going to get pretty nice results right here, if I do say so myself. 37,654 dry stones, which is much better than we got on the 68040. 71 times faster than an A600. Double the speed of an A4000, 8 times the speed of the built-in 25 megahertz 030 processor. These are pretty realistic. Now let's check our drive speeds. I'm actually getting better drive speeds than I was on the Z3 Fastlane, which again surprises the daylights out of me, but hey, it's a win. I'll take it. So let's go ahead and try AIBB. Again, we use the special version for the 68060. Yippee skippy. And here you notice that we have no math coprocessor, so I can't even select it. MU test, Let's see that. 54.34 coupe rate. We'll compare that to the other one. 50 megahertz CPU clock. Right pixel. This will be a curious one. Ba-ding! That is dramatically faster than the 040. Yes, dramatically faster, because we were right about here, about equal with the Amiga 4000. Mem test I'm curious about. Badoink. 24.7 megabytes per second transfer rate on the RAM. I will take that above 4.8 megabytes per second any day of the week. This I expect will be slower. Beach ball. You know what? That's actually not half bad considering there's no FPU in here. It's doing a reasonable job just using the 68060 code. It's going to be, yep, it's slower than the 040, but it's actually faster than the Amiga 3000 with an MMU in it, which, you know, that's okay. That's okay. Let's see, we want to do the ellipse test. I didn't do this on the 040, but that's a pretty hard-hitting test there. Yay. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Now let's see how the performance of the Amiga is with other things. Now it's possible this won't even launch because there's no FPU, but we will see. Yep, no launching because no FPU. There is a solution for that, and I think I may try it. There is a new virtual FPU driver from our friend Tom Richter that will emulate an FPU on a system like this, albeit slowly, but it will function. So I may give that a try. But let's take a look at some other tests. Opening up our downloads folder, let's see if that comes up any faster. Yes, that was dramatically faster than before. Let's see, opening up our prefs folder. This is all dramatically faster. We're going to go back up to a 16 color Workbench, and we're going to see how everything works at 16 colors. Screen redraws, yeah, I'd say that's noticeably faster by every stretch of the imagination there. This is noticeably faster. So we've already determined that the FPU is necessary to run some of my software on here. And I mentioned Thomas Richters software, Soft IEEE. What we're going to do is we're going to test it out and see if it works. I'm going to put the link to the software right in the description. Basically, you decompress the software, and then there's two files we worry about, Soft IEEE library and Soft IEEE. We're going to put those in their appropriate locations, and just for laughs, I will do it through Workbench. Libs is going to get Soft IEEE library. Boing. Soft IEEE is going to go under C. Now we're going to quickly edit our startup sequence and put Soft IEEE in the startup sequence. He says any place after set patch is hunky-dory. So let's see what we got here. There's set patch. Let's do it after CPU check install. We're going to do sys:/soft IEEE. Now we're going to save it, and we will reboot, and we will see if it recognizes a virtual FPU. Okay, we're booted back up. First, let's see if Workbench itself recognizes it. Show config. Holy free holies, look at that. It says it has a 68882 FPU. I love it. Now, we're going to do, let's check some of our utilities here. Sysinfo, see if it recognizes an FPU. Yep, it sure does. Now let's do another test. In this case, it's going to reflect megaflops here, M-flops, 0.08 M-flops, which is really horrible, but this is software emulation of an FPU, so we expect it to be slow. Now let's check AIBB, and we're going to see if it recognizes it, and if it can then, look at that, 040 math, okay. Okay, here we still cannot set a math processor here. AIBB does not recognize the virtual FPU. That's okay. Let's check eyebrows. Now, I can reload both of these without FPU support. Okay, eyebrows recognizes it, and that was loaded using FPU support. That's good. Let's check image effects. I can also load these programs without FPU support, and they'll both work fine. This recognizes it has an FPU. It certainly did not load before because it was looking for an FPU. All right, this is fantastic. Huh, interesting. When I load Art Department Professional, not from my toolbar, but from the actual icon, it does load now. That's curious. Okay, let's try the actual test that we were doing before. Sunset Ham, loads up fast, scale. This was 11 seconds before. 480. 1, 2, 2.5 seconds. It scales it in. That's not bad. And that 11 seconds was with a 68040 with a math coprocessor. Now it took about 7.5 seconds to render. Let's see where we're at here. 1001, 1002, 1000. It's about 2.5 seconds instead of 7 seconds. I would have to say I like the 68060. And so far, the virtual FPU is working good because it at least allows me to launch my FPU-enabled programs like Add Pro, Image Effects, and Eyebrows without crashing out because there's no FPU. So of course, a big question is going to be, how does this work for playing video games? Seems to play fine. My 68060-based Amiga 4000, it does not play games very well, but that's because it's got USB and it's got the networking card in there, and sometimes those can interfere with WHD load and need to be manually disabled. Don't even bother, I just use other computers for gaming. But let's check WHD load of one of my favorite games, Saint Dragon here, and make sure it's going to work okay. And away we go. Let's see how it does. It actually plays really, really nicely, nice and smooth. Now this was made for an OCS ECS Amiga, so it's just perfect for the Amiga 3000. And the 060, it doesn't seem to bother WHD load at all. Excellent. This makes me very happy. So I know a lot of you are going to be asking, so Douglas, how does it play 68060 demos? I don't know. I don't have any. I'm not a big demo guy. I love them. They're great to watch, but I just got a few of them here and there. But none of the 68060 ones. I'm going to have to find them, download them. I'll try them out, and maybe I'll put them up on Facebook and Twitter and such. But for the kind of stuff that I do, which is, you know, a little bit more serious Amiga stuff, the graphics programs, graphics editing, photo work, getting online to download things from AmiNet, testing out software, testing out hardware, this BFG 9060 has been running like a champ in here. And I went ahead and I lifted the lid of my Amiga 3000 and I did a very, very professional temperature test by putting my finger on the 68060. The thing's ice cold in there. Just, it's not generating any substantial heat that I've been able to feel at all. Does this mean that I'm going to get brave and try and overclock it to 75 megahertz? Maybe. I might see how that works. But first, I'm going to test the daylights out of it at 50 megahertz and make sure she's nice and stable. The 128 megs of RAM in here is absolutely fantastic for this particular machine. I love having this much RAM in my Amiga 3000. Do I need more? Always need more. But I'm pretty darn happy having the total of like 142 megs that this thing now has inside of it. Unbelievable. I'm really thrilled that the IEEE software from Thomas Richters, which again, I'll have the link in the description. You can download it yourself. It is in beta, but since early November when he released it, he's already released like 6 updates for it where he's fixing things that people are patching. are recommending. So hop on over to the EAB link that I have in the description. Thank you, Remy, for putting me onto that. I really appreciate that, buddy. And it does what it needs to do. It makes it so I can use my FPU-enabled software without having to reload everything, so that when I do get my full RC chip in here, I don't have to reload all my software again. It's all just going to work. What are my final opinions of this board? It's well made, it's reliable, it's fast. I love the fact that if you're handy enough, you can use it with a 68040 or a 68060. You know, there is nothing wrong with a nice 25 megahertz 040. Those chips are dirt cheap online, like 35, 45 bucks. Get this for your Amiga 3000 and see if you can push it up to like a 50 megahertz 68040 with some good cooling. You know, mind you, you have to cool this down. As long as you've got the equipment to reflash it and set the jumpers properly for an 040, why not? It works. Huge thanks to my patrons for all of your wonderful, wonderful support. Gosh, guys, I really, really appreciate it. Here you see their glorious names scrolling by a copy of that image, the sunset image that I converted into ham mode there. If you're interested in becoming a patron, pop on over to patreon.com/10mark. As little as $2 a month. Join the party. Buy yourself a BFG. If you want one, if you need some expansion for your Amiga 3000 or Amiga 4000, this thing's brilliant. The LC chips are actually more useful now with Thomas Richters' new soft IEEE software. It makes it more useful to me. I mean, when I can still generate things using the virtual math coprocessor, and it's, you know, at least as fast as like a 68030 with a math coprocessor, you know, somewhere close to that speed, please follow me on Twitter and Facebook, Mastodon, Instagram, all of those social networks. I'm on all of them, and I try to post fairly regularly. Please, please like and subscribe. I'm excited that my subscriber count's going to hit 6502 pretty soon, and I'll do a special 8-bit show as soon as it hits 6502. Tell me below your stories about what 68060 processor solution you use, what you use it for, the problems you've had with it. Tell me if you've got a BFG or if you're looking for one. But until next time, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.